Yeah, we wanted to, we don't want to drain the bathtub. We wanted to, keep it full and keep it going. It's not like we went into this because we thought, woohoo, we're going to get rich as we
Right. Yeah, it's just a different mindset.
We're good? Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Delacorte Lecture. We're fortunate to have the Delacorte Lectures as an opportunity to explore magazine journalism over the course of the semester, which is obviously a rapidly changing part of the profession. We're very fortunate tonight to have with us Evan Ratliff, in part because Evan is one of the great magazine writers of our generation and one of the great voices in the profession. He's written for The New Yorker, for Wired, for National Geographic. He didn't write for me when I was editor at Rolling Stone, which was a great loss for me. And
I had a piece that was killed.
Oh, that's right. We killed a piece, so he wasn't that good. I guess I take that back. But also because Evan is one of the people who is, one of the journalists who has thought the most deeply and struggled the most mightily with the shift to digital and all of the potential and pitfalls that has held, especially for long-form journalism. He is the co-founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of The Atavist, which is really two things. It's a software platform that enables people to tell stories, and it's a magazine on that platform that tells its own long-form stories once a month. It's been incredibly successful at doing that at a very high level. It's been nominated for 2 Emmy Awards, and I believe 8 National Magazine Awards, which is astonishing. And last year was the first digital platform to win a National Magazine Award for feature writing. Evan's own work as a writer has been a finalist for the National Magazine Award twice. And in his own bio, he has one of those annoying sections that very successful people have that says a lot of this stuff that I've just told you, and then says, and on the side, and then describes a bunch of other stuff that he does on the side, which always really embarrasses and aggravates me. But on the side, he helped found something called Pop-Up Magazine, which if you're have spent any time on the West Coast, you would know is a very successful live literary event that enables people to share their work in performance with others. So he's a man of many talents, and we're happy to have him here to share some of his thoughts with us, and then to, after he's done, to have a Q&A and open it up to you all to ask him what you're interested in. So please welcome Evan.
Thank you, Eric. I should say that Rolling Stone story that got killed deserved to be killed, because I feel like writers never say that. But I looked back on it later, and it was justly killed. I'm very honored to be here. I appreciate everyone who came out. I feel like it's a little intimidating that this whole thing should be rebranded from like lecture. I feel like the idea of a lecture is very intimidating to me as a speaker, but also maybe to the audience. Like it implies something very heavier than like a guy with some notes on his phone talking to you. But I thought I'd chat a little bit about what I know about for a few minutes. But first to say that I've had the fortune to speak to people in an academic environment before that includes journalism students. And I often find that there's a Q&A section after I talk, and that the questions in the Q&A section, the first questions initially come down to essentially like, how do I get a job? Where are the jobs? Why are you not talking to us about jobs? Which I don't say disparagingly. I actually think that's probably the right questions to be asking. But I thought I would sort of preface this by saying that I'm not necessarily the best person to be the one telling you where the jobs are, because I've essentially spent my career avoiding gainful employment. First as a freelance writer for almost 10 years, and then as someone who started my own magazine and startup, which is definitely employment, but has not always been gainful for me. And I also, as Eric pointed out, I tend to get involved in these projects on the side that may or may not be gainful, but are certainly not employment. But I will say that from a position of someone who's started something on the web that is basically magazine writing, that these days there is an incredible amount of competition when it comes to journalism. So when we started Atavist and the Atavist magazine 5 years ago, we were sort of looking at what was considered like a desolate landscape for longer journalism, that everything was going shorter and everything was going, quick, newsy, Twitter. People were sort of obsessed with the idea that magazine writing would kind of go away, that there was no market for it in the journalism world. In fact, I always like to show this graph, mostly because it's like my favorite graph that I've ever seen. And this is a thing that I found. This actually came out initially. They update it every few years, but it's a graph of attention span, and you can see where attention span is going from the graph. And you can see that the data points are, at the time of Dickens, our attention span was tremendously high. There are no numbers on the left side, so you can't really judge what they're talking about. But by the time we got to Hemingway, look how much it's collapsed already. And then it's on this asymptote, so it's gotten to YouTube and now Vine, and presumably like it'll just keep going down till we're just like monosyllabic. All we can understand is sort of like just noises and grunts. But this was sort of like the conventional wisdom for like the early and mid 2000s in particular about the way people were interacting with quote unquote content, especially digitally, which is that there was no room for anything that did not adhere to this graph when it came to our attention span. And I think what we've found over the last 5 years is that that's not true, that actually there's a huge diverse world for all types of digital content, or whatever you want to call it. Some journalists sort of don't like to succumb to referring to their work as content, and I think that's valid. But in the spirit of like understanding what all's out there, I think generally there's a huge range of stuff that's being produced and stuff that's being consumed. And anytime you have a large amount of very short, very digestible news, there's also a lane for depth. There's also a lane for storytelling. There's also a lane for entertaining people. And that's sort of the lane that we've tried to occupy. And when it comes to the question that always gets asked at these about jobs, being an outfit that is trying to compete for people's attention on the web, the thing that we've found that I wish wasn't true, but I'm glad is true for people who are coming up in journalism, is that there's now organizations that didn't exist, many organizations that didn't exist, even when we started Atavist. Some of them that have grown to enormous size and employ hundreds, if not thousands of people producing various levels of journalism. Now, some of that journalism you may not like. Some of it you may think is not very good. But a lot of it is, and actually you can find a lot of great journalism in places that you couldn't find it just 5 years ago, and particularly 10 years ago. So I think there's a lot of talk about the decline of writing and journalism in different ways, and there's no question that we've lost a lot, particularly when it comes to local newspapers and particularly when it comes to alt weeklies. But we've also gained in terms of places where this type of work is presumably being produced. In fact, we've gained so much that now people are complaining about something else, which is that there's too much long-form writing on the web. So if you at all read, media sort of hot takes or media criticism, which I don't recommend that you do, but if you do, you'll find that people now are saying there's an excess and there's a fetishization of longer form writing on the web. And that may be true in some quarters, but the amount of long form writing on the web is actually still a fraction of the sort of wider content that's produced on the web. And I think even now, there's still room for people to produce well-written, well-edited, potentially fact-checked, I'll talk about that a little bit later, work on the web. And it may seem like a glut if you're sort of a news junkie who reads this stuff all the time, but actually there's still a huge, huge lane for producing this type of work. So I think the place where the Adams Magazine fits in is that we're a very small outfit, and we're not a big employer of journalists. But the way we operate is that we try to sort of mimic the type of magazine writing that I came up working on at these magazines, the type of structures that produce that work, which include spending a lot of time on stories, editing them very heavily, hiring fact checkers to work on them. And that's our particular niche. So, we often produce stories that are like this one, very serious, very international. This is a story about the Rwandan genocide. Essentially, it's about two people in Rwanda who were sort of on the opposite sides of the genocide, who then have worked to reconcile. One of them actually tried to kill the other one during the genocide, and they've now tried to reconcile. And we do sort of investigative reporting like this, which is about a guy who was a juvenile put in prison for life in Detroit, who it turns out was actually a government informant, and the government sort of abandoned him after he helped them capture a lot of the 1980s drug dealers in Detroit. He's still in prison now. And then we do things that are purely fun, like this incredible story about the early 20th century effort to import hippopotamuses into America as a food source, that happened to involve two former spies who had been on the opposite sides of the Boer War in South Africa. It's a crazy story. And I show you these partly by way of saying that one of the interesting things about the digital world right now, when it comes to the type of work that you can do, is that it's very open and it's very entrepreneurial. And I say that not just in the way that like you can go out and start your own thing, but it means that all of these organizations like the BuzzFeeds and the Fusions and the Mike and Mashable, all of these organizations, they're all new, and they're all sort of like, think of them like babies that have like non-developed immune systems. Like if you go work there, you can actually infect them with like positive journalistic values. Like they can be swayed towards good work, and you can see it. You go look at BuzzFeed today, and there's a lot of people who still think of BuzzFeed as this place that's full of, lists, and it is. But you can find great journalism there because there are great journalists working there. And that's the only reason why there's great journalists there, because journalism is because there are people there who have those values, the kind of values that are perpetuated here at this journalism school, that they then go work at these places and they infect those places with these values. So it's sort of easy to think that every place is defined by its worst work, that places are content mills, or places are just sort of like spewing out as much content as possible. And that's certainly, there's some truth to that. But I think what's really interesting about this time is the ability to go do your own thing, whether that's your own thing entirely independent, or to be able to do your own thing within the context of a place that's new, that's trying to do new things, that's trying to figure out how to, win the game on the web, which no one really knows how to do right now. So I think the other thing I'll say is that I'm not really, it's sort of hard for me to be an optimist about magazine writing, because I'm not like an optimist by nature, or I should say that I was not an optimist by nature until I had a kid, and now I'm like an optimist by necessity. But one of the things that I am optimistic about, sort of ironically because I'm standing here, is that I feel like I am not the best person to represent the future of magazine writing or writing on the web. That one of the most amazing things about what's happening on the web right now is that it's so open that we're getting new voices and new approaches, and that a lot of the ideas that sort of lived in magazines, like having a voice, using first person, those things now exist in all of these forms on the web. They exist in podcasts, they exist in all of the forms that are now developing, and that a few years from now, you'll see entirely new voices that are not me, that are not like 40-year-old white guy journalists standing up here telling you about the future of magazine writing, that it's being made by different people. And to me, that's very exciting, whether it's in form, like a live magazine like Pop-Up, or it's traditional, like the New York Times, or it's, you know, brand new on the web, like something like Mike, or people trying to figure out how to, you know, put these values into Snapchat stories and that sort of thing. So I guess I would close this part by saying that I'm very excited about the possibilities for magazine writing on the web. In fact, so excited that, you know, we go out and look at something like Serial and what Serial did in terms of podcasts, and we say, is there a way for us to do this on the web? Is there a way to try to sort of create that same feeling, that same serialized approach through writing on the web? So we launched this morning. We have no idea if it will be successful, but I think the ability to sort of create this sort of thing in this moment and feel good about the work you're producing and see if it works, that's very exciting to me. So I think I'll stop there and we can talk.
Great. Well, thanks, and thanks for the optimism, even if it's forced. It's still welcome. Well, there are a lot of things to talk about. One I wanted to start with was just in your own career, having made the switch from writer to editor. Because writers have very fixed ideas about what editors do and what they do well and what they do wrong. Editors have very fixed ideas about writers. What did you learn making that transition?
I learned a lot. I mean, one thing I learned is, which was a process, and probably like the early writers for the Out of His magazine suffered a little bit for it, is, you know, the difference between is sort of the subjectiveness of editing. Like, I think when you're a writer and you get edits from an editor, you tend to think you're dealing in sort of like right and wrong, and you say, no, I don't want to do that because that's not right. That's not the right approach. And the editor's saying, no, we need to restructure it this way. This is a better way. And then it wasn't really until I got to be an editor that I sort of realized there are 1,000 ways to do this story, and I'm trying to find the one that I think's best, and you're trying to find the one that you think's best, and this is actually just a negotiation. Like, we're just negotiating over trying to find some sort of solution that we feel is optimal between us. And so I think that's the difference in some ways between an editor that sits down and rewrites people and an editor that sort of helps a writer find their own way to the best possible story. And that to me sort of distinguishes, like, a good editor can take someone's work and go in and say, like, nope, should be this, should be this, should be this. But I think a great editor, which I don't actually think that I am, I think we have had and have great editors work for the Out of His magazine, is someone who can take a writer and get a draft that's okay or good and like help them find their best possible voice.
Do you think that's a function to some extent too of how journalism is taught? Do you think writers come, and particularly coming out of maybe more of a newsroom, where most magazine writers used to originate from originally, that there's kind of a right lead or a right way to do it because it's more about conveying the information quickly and efficiently as opposed to having a voice or doing some of the things that magazines do?
It could be. I mean, that certainly could be, yeah, for some people. I think if they came from the newspaper world, or now, I mean, certain people who come up as editors in the digital world, like, it really is all about speed. I mean, you just have to get a certain amount of stuff out, and you can't be too delicate about it, and they just sort of know how to. I mean, there's editors that work on the web; they're incredible. They can turn 10 stories a day. I think when it comes to this kind of magazine writing, I tend to think it's more out of just like the particular people that get into this who really care about it, and then they tend to think that their approach to the story is the right approach, and especially editors who have seen. A lot of editors have, if they've worked in like long form writing for a long time, they've seen you have seen hundreds of 5,000 word stories, if not thousands of 5,000 word stories or 4,000 word stories. And so you kind of get a draft, and you say, I see the 5 sections in this, and they should be this. And you're probably right. But the writer probably thinks like, no, I want to start in the middle of the chronology, and like it'll be really clever, and it'll be, it's maybe an approach that they want to strive for, and you're trying to sort of like balance those things.
Right. So the same question, going from print to digital, what did you learn in that transition about storytelling, about the kind of storytelling that you've done in your career?
Well, partly I think I've sort of put myself in a privileged or unique position by we only do this certain type of work. So really I kind of made it so that I didn't have to adapt as much as most people have to adapt, because we don't do anything short and we don't do anything quick. So the biggest way people have to adapt on the web is going from having this luxury of time and fact checkers who, catch your mistakes, and then you just don't have that safety net. And we kind of created a tiny little safety net for what we do. I think one of the things that I found that I like about switching to the digital world is that, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, like in magazines, there's this idea of having like a billboard paragraph or a nut graph, which sort of like explains the whole story for you so that the reader can know what they're in for in some ways. And that concept, whether or not that's a good concept for print magazines, I feel like on the web, if you want to do longer stories, I like doing them without that. And I feel like the best way to hook someone on the web is to not give them that, to make them read, to give them a story that goes A, B, C, D, E that they don't want to put down. And there's so much competition for what they might put it down for that there's a real premium on creating a story that people, say, I looked up and I missed my subway stop to read it. So that part, I feel like that transition has been nice, like figuring out, okay, we're just going to do long stories. What is the way in which we can get people to actually like read these stories on their phones when there's so many other things they could be reading?
Right. So let me challenge you a little bit, because I think we're living in this time when something is online or digital or on the phone, people think immediately equate that with being innovative or interesting in some new way. And a lot of what you've been saying really is that what you're doing is very old school. It's just on a different platform. And the slides you show, maybe the intro, oh, look, it's a video and we're flying over this village. But beyond that, it's a magazine story. And it could live in a magazine and be presented in a magazine format without really altering it very much from the way that you've presented it. I guess, first off, is that true? Do you see it that way? And then second off, what are the things that you have found that you can do differently or that interest you about the kind of the digital presentation of the work?
That's a really good question. It's true that I think most of the stories that we do could live in a magazine. They would have to be a magazine with a very, very large feature well, because lots of them are 15,000 or 20,000 words. So they would occupy the entire feature well, if not the entire magazine in some cases. But I don't think if print magazine was willing to do like purely narrative features, like we could exist in print. In fact, we have a book collection coming out, which is literally just text. Like there's no images in it at all. So it's just text of like the best of our first 5 years. I think when it comes to what is innovative, partly it's just changed. When we started, like if I was talking to you 5 years ago, I probably would have talked a lot about the way we design the stories, and that we were using video and we're using audio, and that was a big thing. Like we got a lot of attention for that, and it was I don't know if it was innovative or not, but it was certainly like not many people were doing it at the time. So however you define innovative, but the whole world has changed. Everyone's doing that now. So really it's just about good design. And even that, I never really thought of as a thing that was different in the digital world. That we always talked about it, even in our offices, as we want to design these stories for the digital reading with the same care that, Wired magazine or another magazine designs a feature in the magazine, which is like someone sits there and says, how can we create this experience that's unique, that caters to the text that's there, or maybe it's a photo essay, so it's predominantly visual. And we wanted to take that same approach, which meant we could use video, we could use audio, because we were playing in this other field. So, but there's also limits to that, I think. Like, we ran up against limits to that you can't just stuff something full of video and audio and expect it to feel innovative and new. Like, you have to design it sparingly, you have to be careful about it. So I think we're probably not as innovative as we were a few years ago. Like, we don't have the resources to go to the next level, which is something that's got, 100 videos that link together that you can drill down in them. Like, that stuff is very hard to do. So we're just trying to do very nicely designed stories on the web and occasionally do something that feels, may feel different to people. Like, the serialized thing may feel different to people, or it may not.
What do you know about your readers, both who they are and how and where they read you?
We know a lot more about how they read us. Most people read on the phone. They generally, like, the reading times are very long. Like, the average reading time on an out-of-a story will be like 9 minutes, which if you don't work on the web sounds like garbage, like, because like no one can read an out-of-a story in 9 minutes. So obviously a lot of people are not finishing the stories, but the average reading time for like a news story on the web is like 30 seconds or less. So so we're actually proud of that. So they read us on the phone. We've done some like demographic things, and they always sort of like shook out the way we expected, which is they're coastal readers. It's like the coasts in Austin, Texas. That was the survey that we did. They're people who, they love The New Yorker, they love reading Michael Lewis books. Like, our audience is not so huge that we capture like, outside of people who love reading, magazines and things like that. So it's not like something like BuzzFeed where they get 90 million people. Like, we're talking about, a couple 100,000 people reading out of a story. Like, that's really, we're happy with that.
Right. There's still this prevailing notion that people won't read long stuff on the phone. And the fact that you and others have proven that wrong, and the fact that people do continue to seek out and read long-form stuff in everywhere, on the phone, in their iPad, in bed at night, or on the beach, wherever, why do you think that isn't recognized more, that there is this kind of audience for the work?
I don't really know why. I feel like it's partly just people who write about the media tend to consume an incredible amount of media that's not representative of the way normal people consume media. Like, they're on Twitter all day. They're picking up this and that and like reading it really quick, and I do that. But I think millions of people still love to read books. So like, books sell in bookstores, books sell in Target, books sell in Costco. Like, they're not always the books that I read are like tops of the bestseller list. But sometimes you look at the bestseller list and you think, wow, yeah, there's a lot of great books on there. So it's just, I don't really know how to explain it other than I think there's obviously a very clear phenomenon of like younger people immersed in digital technology who love things like Snapchat, and then like older people look at something like Snapchat and they don't understand it, and they just sort of say, well, these people don't read anymore, like all they do is Snapchat. But I just, like, those things aren't mutually exclusive to me, and so I don't really feel, even if that number is declining, there's still a tremendous number of people that are reading. And like I was saying, I'm not trying to get 90 million people to read an Atavist story or the collection of Atavist stories over the course of a month. So that sort of broader conversation around whether people are consuming it more this or that way is less relevant to me than like, are there still people doing this? And I think the answer to that is like very clearly yes, especially with things like the Kindle and, digital reading. It defies logic to think that suddenly everyone's just going to stop reading that stuff. People are reading more than ever.
Right. I want to open it up and invite everybody to participate. So if you have a question, please come on up to the microphone and join in. And while we're waiting for the first person to jump up, let me ask you briefly about the Atavist, the platform, because people always gravitate right to the journalism and want to talk about what the magazine's doing. But tell us about the platform and what that does and what it is.
So the platform is something that we kind of fell into accidentally. So we wanted to start a magazine. We wanted to do this type of design that I was describing, where we incorporate, certain types of visuals and video and audio and animated GIFs and all kinds of things. And we kind of built our own what's called a content management system in order to do that. And then it turned out that other people also wanted to use that content management system. So we sort of turned that into, really it's our business. Like, that's our fundamental business, is as a software company. And now you can just go sign up and use it. So everyone from individuals use it, all the way up to very large media companies use it to do this sort of like specialized, usually longer storytelling. Like, it's not, you can do shorter things on it, but it's sort of conducive to like media-rich, longer storytelling. So, even like the Weather Channel uses it to do a series of stories and things like that. So, it's kind of a funny, it's a funny situation, because our magazine, which in many quarters is more well-known in some ways, is almost like the flagship for that platform.
Yeah, come on up.
First of all, thank you for coming here and sharing your experience with us. Can you talk a little bit about how the whole thing started, how you kind of got the concept together, how it developed a little bit? That would be really interesting to me.
Yeah, sure. Usually when I talk, I do, but I think maybe I'm bored of it. So I assume other people are bored of it. So we started it. There's 3 founders, and the way that it started was I was a magazine writer, freelance magazine writer, and at the time, so it's all different now, but at the time, I wrote a feature that for Wired magazine that was like on the cover, and it was like very widely read, and then the digital treatment of it was, to me, it was just like so underwhelming, because rightly so, they were focused on print. So they put it up on the web, and I just thought, I have all this video, like I have all these images that I've gathered. I'd worked on this thing for months and months. Like, why can't they do better than this? So my editor, who's one of the co-founders of Wired, was my editor at the time. We started talking about that. Like, what if you had a digital-only thing that did this type of story, but really did it for the web, that really tried to create that experience that wasn't for print first, and then just like transformed onto the web. And then it probably would have stopped there because we were just 2 journalists, like basically bitching about something. And then, but he knew someone else who was a programmer, and so he kind of got us all together and said, what if we actually did this? And then, it's kind of like with any projects that I've gotten involved in, like a live magazine or like a podcast, that if you get together with some people that you like and that they're talented and you're all kind of ambitious, like my assumption is that'll work out to something. At the very least, you'll produce something that you'll feel good about. So we really just said, let's put out a couple of stories. Like, we'll just put out a couple of stories and see what happens. And what happened was partly that our third co-founder, Jeff, created this software platform, and that had some like business opportunity in it. And then the other thing that happened was not many people were doing long things on the web then, so we got a lot of attention for doing that, and it sort of gave us a momentum that we could actually turn it into a real business. So it was really just sort of like a project that we started that then snowballed into a business. Yeah.
Can I do a quick follow-up? Did
Yeah.
you have a specific target audience? Were you saying this is for a specific group of people, or was it more general than that?
It was more general than that. We probably should, but we generally don't advertise in the stories. Sometimes we get a sponsor. If we were selling ads into the stories, you got to know who you're targeting and what the demographic is, and because you got to tell your average. On the web it's a little different because you can just sell display ads, and that's not as the requirements aren't as much as if you're like a print magazine. But for us, we were kind of targeting anyone who loves to read these stories, which is not very business minded, but that was our approach. We were almost assuming that they were out there somewhere and imagining that they were, but we didn't have a specific group in mind.
Hi. I actually have 2 questions. My first one is, I think like when you guys were starting, there was a lot of talk about also there's the tablets were a little more popular, and like the idea of ebooks or like a 50,000 word story is sort of a standalone little novella thing. Is that completely not in the equation anymore? Is there still like, where do tablets come in, and where does like the short ebook
Yeah,
still in play?
you're totally right. That was when we launched the iPad was not even a year old. So it was this moment where a lot of people were sort of like, what's going to happen on the tablet? Like, how are magazines going to exist on the tablet? And it's going to be huge for magazines. And like, there was the Daily and there was all this stuff. And we started it with an app. Like that was where before we even went on the web, we had an app first. And I don't think, I mean, in some ways, like, those things haven't really gone away. They've just like the hype around them has gone away. So now like ebooks of all lengths sell like all over Amazon. So it's just not, there was a period when it was like, oh my God, people might read this length of thing on this device. And now it's just so ubiquitous that no one really talks about it. I will say that the thing that has probably changed most is the idea of a magazine having a standalone app. Like when we started, there was sort of this promise that like you put out an app and people find your app and download your app and then you've got them. It's like they've subscribed to a magazine. But that proved to be like a little bit unfounded unless you're a giant magazine or like a very established thing because there's so many apps and it's hard for people to find your app in the App Store and it's hard for people to be convinced to download your app and then it just sits on their phone and they don't open it. So we actually got rid of our apps last year and we're only on the web. So the thing that's changed the most is probably that people just read all this stuff on the web now and they actually don't necessarily even want you to make a special app. I mean, in some cases they do and they're successful, but I think that has shifted a lot even in 5 years when it comes to like publishing.
And then my second question was, there seems to be this conflation of like long and literary, like as if good writing and long writing, like long form is, not that long form is not good, but that short can't, like short is quick and internet-y and long form is like the kind of thing. And I just wonder if that's if you think that's like a real thing where like a 800 word piece can't be like also have like the literary style, like that there isn't room for shorter magazine pieces.
Yeah, I would say, how can I answer that? I don't believe that, but like I don't believe the premise of the question either. I feel like the premise of the question is that there is a belief that longer is more literary, but I don't actually think that many people believe that. I feel like there's like a tiny argument that goes on the web over people saying, some people think that long form, they're emphasizing long, and it means that it's better because it's long. But really, that concept is just all of the ideas that used to be in magazines and still are in magazines sort of transmuted to these stories, and they've happened to be called something related to their length. But I don't think any sort of credible person really says like it's better if it's longer. Like shorter stories are hard to do. Like a really good, sharp short story is hard to do, and they were hard to do in magazines. Like a great 800-word story or a great talk of the town piece or a great piece on the All. Like there's good writing and bad writing at all lengths is what I think. And I definitely don't think something is better because it's longer, but I also don't think that people are out there just like making long things because they think they're going to be better. I think people make long things and they're maybe not structured or edited correctly or fact-checked or reported well, and they're terrible. Like sometimes they're really bad, and sometimes short things are also terrible. And I don't know that the ratio is much different between short and long, but I prefer to like write and read longer things. That's my only view on it, I guess.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for being here. I was just wondering, when people pitch stories to you, what is it that you're looking for? Are the most attractive stories things that haven't been covered much, like the hippopotamus story, or what is it that strikes you?
I think for us, we're a little weird because we want purely narrative stories. So we almost care, like most places would care a lot more than we do about the news value of the story, like trying to get into the news cycle and kind of have an impact. And we're actually interested in this sort of distillation of the narrative. So the thing we look for most is the pitch of a story that if you stopped halfway through, you would say, wait, what happens next? Like, that's the kind of story we're looking for, a story with characters that has like tension and surprise that pulls you along in the story. Now, ultimately, there are lots of stories like that that are, that need more sort of news value to tell. Like this, everyone has stories every day that are like plot-driven stories. So then it comes down to just sort of what seems really interesting. So the hippopotamus thing just seemed like such an, if you're going to do a historical story, it has to be something that people would read that has some salience for them now. And that story did. And if you're going to do a story now, it either has to be something that people will say, wow, I didn't know that, I learned a lot from that, or just that is a crazy yarn. So unfortunately, we don't have, that's sort of hard to parse in some ways. Like, it's down to like the editor whose inbox it lands in, saying like, I've never heard of that, that's interesting, let's throw it into the pitch meeting. But fundamentally, the thing that we're looking for is a narrative story rather than a topic-driven story.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. Do you see your platform and the magazine being in competition with each other, or if not now, then in the future? And how will you evolve, or will you encourage that?
That's a good question. They're not, we don't view them as being in competition. We sort of view the magazine as being like the first customer of the platform. So like the magazine uses the platform, and the magazine is built on the platform. So the magazine is always asking like the developers, like, do this, do that, can you add this feature? And then of course we have like tens of thousands of other users who are also asking that. So in some ways, I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but other magazines using the platform are competition for our magazine. So like California Sunday magazine, which we have a close relationship with, is built on top of our platform on the web. And in some ways we would compete with them, but I guess we take a little bit of an agnostic view of like competition like that it's not necessarily zero sum, that if we help California Sunday make their features look beautiful, that's not necessarily going to hurt our readership over here in the magazine, that the magazine should be able to find its own readership, and those people are going to find a way to tell their stories anyway. So if they do it on our platform, so much the better. But yeah, we view them as complementary. In some ways, there's a tension between them, because anytime you have two businesses in one, there's going to be some tension there. But for the most part, I think they're fairly complementary.
Do you track how people who use the platform monetize their work, or?
We do, yeah. I mean, some of them, it's an interesting mix. Like, a lot of them are advertising driven, but interestingly, they'll do things on the platform and not put advertising in them. So there's this whole debate going on about banner ads now and ad blocking and the way ads slow things down and on mobile. And so you'll get like, we have like giant newspapers in Germany that they're selling ads into their website, and then they'll use our platform to do some specialized story that maybe has like a sponsor on it, or maybe has no advertising on it at all, because they want, that's sort of like to build their brand. It's not necessarily, they're not trying to monetize that specific thing. And then we have other outfits, like California Sunday is a good example, that do advertising on the platform. Like they actually create advertisements in the platform and they publish in their magazine. And then we have people who do, native advertising or like content marketing. So, someplace like the Daily Dot, which is an online, newspaper magazine, they have a whole like division where they kind of create content for advertisers, and they might use the platform for that. So there's like a pretty wide range of the way people approach it.
And please come on up if you have a question, and while you're doing that, I'll ask you to put on one of your other hats. Another on-the-side thing that you do is you're the co-host of the long-form podcast. And podcasting is another area where long-form has really boomed, where it's not a new way necessarily to tell long-form stories, but there's a new popularity to it, and a lot of experimentation and a lot of startups going after it. Tell us a little bit about that side of what you've observed, working on that podcast and starting to realize that this is another way to reach an audience with.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time in podcasts, and it's kind of exploding at the moment. I mean, I think again, like we started a little bit before that moment, and we just kind of said, you know what, we love talking to writers, and we love the idea of like sitting at a bar and asking a writer, like, how did you do that? Like, how did you get that story? Or like, how did your career develop? Like, that's the stuff. I never went to journalism school, so I don't know if that's what you learn in journalism school, but like, I love just asking writers, like, how did you do that? Where did you come from? And so we just started doing that, and it just so happened, I think, to coincide with like podcasts going a little more mainstream. And so we have like a pretty nice audience, but you know, outside of that, now like podcasts are the thing, and it's an interesting time because there's right now I think the audience for podcasts is growing, and there's probably a limit to that, and so eventually, you know, people are going to be competing for audience in a way they're not necessarily competing right now. It feels a little like Wild West, which is pretty exciting. It's almost like early internet days, not early internet, but like maybe early 2000s web, when blogging started, where you have these places that are, you know, like Gimlet, that are just like emerged out of nothing, and now they have all these shows and all of this storytelling. But I will say that it does feel like the same principles apply in some ways. Like when you're telling stories, like our podcast is just an interview podcast, but the kind of stuff that's being started now that's about storytelling, it really involves the same principles that you see and that came from This American Life or came from the New Yorker and magazines. Like, if you can't do those things, it's really, really hard to create a storytelling podcast, I think, in the long term that's going to be successful. So the ones that are going to be successful are the ones that sort of live by those principles for the most part. I mean, there'll be like interview shows and chat shows like ours that will like, that's easy to produce something like that. But to produce something that's like real storytelling, I haven't done it, but it strikes me as being quite difficult to do.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for coming. And you just mentioned that when you pick up some stories to publish, you focus not only on the news values of the story, but also the narratives. And may I know, like, we talked about all kinds of digital forms of the publishing right now, but I'm coming back to the fundamental of the writing. Like, what's your understanding of narrative, and what's a story, and what's your view on the storytelling?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, people have very varying views of narrative. Like, well, that's one thing we found when we say to writers, like, pitch us narrative stories. They have very different views of what that means. And for us specifically, for the type of stories that we do, there's a kind of narrative that we don't do, which you find in magazines, which is sort of a topic-based story that's illustrated by some anecdotes. And it has narrative quality to it. But when I say like pure narrative, it's a way of getting at, like, we do stories that sort of sound like movies. Like, they might start like in the middle of a scene. Like, they might start with the most dramatic scene, and then you're going to go back in time, and then you're going to get the story all the way through. And the quality, I keep coming back to the quality that we sort of look for most, is the quality of, like, this is a story that if you told someone and you stopped, they would say, wait, what happens next? Like, all of our stories have to have that. And if you look at a story that's even, I'm not disparaging these stories at all, I love them, like a great Trump profile, for instance. It might be a story that you read to the end because it's so fantastically done, but it's probably not going to be a story that if you stop in the middle, you'll feel like, wait, what happens next? Like, you'll feel like, oh, I'll try to pick the rest of that up later. So that's kind of how we distinguish our type of narrative, and I don't think one's better than the other. Both of them have like their own value. It's just our particular choice for how we want to do stories. And I think across all of those, I mean, that's one of the things that I think is nice in the digital era, is that I think people are coming back a little bit to, you know, quality writing and stylish writing. And, you know, if you look at even short things on the web, to the earlier question, it's not about being short or long. It's like there's this real value in having an original voice and a stylish way to approach it, even if you're writing a short take opinion piece, but especially if you're writing a longer piece that has reporting that has to be structured and written in a certain way, that there's value to having the ability to do that, developing the ability to do that, and having an editor who helps you shape that. So that for me is sort of a positive for at least like our approach on the web.
But then how do you handle the tension between the non-fictions and the dramatic narrative you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, that's a separate issue. I mean, you always have to sort of come back to the facts. So, you know, we have fact checkers that work on the stories. We require our writers to, you know, to report things out, and you know, occasionally have to rein people in if they take too much literary license. But yeah, it's something you have to be very careful about when you're doing that type of narrative writing. Is it's easy to get caught up in the story and maybe push it too far. But I think we have a number of checks on that, which include like pretty heavy editing and also fact checking. Like if you have a fact checker who's calling up your sources and checking all your sources and saying, did they say this? Did they say this? That's at least a decent. You can always. I mean, if you look at Stephen Glass or situations like that, like people can beat that too if they really want to make stuff up. Like it's hard to stop them. But I think most people don't want to make stuff up. They just want to tell great stories. And if you put some checks in, like you can make sure that they get it right.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So given the ephemeral nature of a lot of web-based publishing platforms, do you have some sort of contingency plan that would ensure this work lives, say, 20, 30 years from now, given that this is very interesting work, but we can't say where the atavists will be, and it's not like we're in the time of print where things are documented and stored in libraries. So have you actually imagined what happens in the future and maybe people looking back and being able to access this work?
That is such a good question. I would say that I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I think I take a kind of maybe not internally consistent view of that question. One of which is like we always, when we make something, we try to assume that it will last. We're kind of making things under the illusion that the web is not ephemeral. Like we want someone to look back at a story. That's partly why we don't do newsy stories. Like if you look at a story like American Hippopotamus that we produced 2 years ago, it's as fresh now as it was then, hopefully. On the other hand, I don't think things have to last forever. I mean, magazines, I've got stacks and stacks of magazines. I've got magazines molding in boxes that like I had a feature in, and I was like, I'm gonna save this magazine. And then I've just moved houses, and like, it's kind of ridiculous that I have these magazines. And I'm sort of pretending like they do last forever. But no one else has that pile of magazines. And yes, they exist in a library, but unless someone's doing a research project, they're probably not digging through like New Yorkers or Wired's from like the mid-2000s. So I don't want to say that it's okay if our stuff goes away. I want to make it last as long as I can, but I guess I don't care deeply about ensuring that it's like archived in the proper way so that it like lasts 1,000 years or something like that. Like lots of stuff is ephemeral, and like you try to make it last as long as you want, but also like no dominion is everlasting, so it's okay if maybe it doesn't make it, I guess is my view.
Thank you.
For some reason on that question, I went straight to the zombie apocalypse. I was sort of like, all right, like once the internet's dead, like, and all the zombies are roaming around.
Well, all the zombies will be there, but like you'll see a screen with like an atavist story still there.
Right.
It'll be incredible.
One of the effects of the digital age, and you sort of touched on it a little earlier, is the amount of noise that it creates. There's almost a glut now of content in a way that people feel overwhelmed by. And it's very hard to know how to navigate it, how to pull the good stuff out of it. And here you are in doing these long stories, putting a lot of resources and time and love into them, being very intentional about how they're created, aiming for very high quality. And when you do that, I think when you first start doing that as a journalist, you have this idea that I'm going to make this story great, and then it's like going to go out into the world, and everybody's going to read it, and it's going to be celebrated, and then you do the story and like nobody pays any attention to it. And as an editor, when you do that over and over again, you do stories, you're absolutely sure like this story is the one, it's going to be huge, and it falls flat. And then you have some other story and you'll think, well, this is okay, and then it'll be huge. What's been your experience with that? Are there examples of each you could give us of ones you thought were mediocre that went big, or that were sure winners that fell flat? And how do you approach that bigger question of getting an audience, breaking through the noise and finding an audience beyond doing the good work that it requires to do that?
Well, in the first part, I feel like that would be very cruel to certain writers. We've of course had stories that we thought everyone's going to want to read this, and no one wanted to read it. And then we've had stories that we thought, I don't want to say that we thought no one would want to read it, but we had this great story called Mother Stranger by this writer named Chris Beam, and she's an incredible writer. She writes novels, and it's kind of a memoir story, and we thought it was amazing, but definitely when we put it out, this was like 3 years ago, we thought, I don't know, this seems like a tough go. And it's like, it was our most read story that year. We sold a bunch of them on Amazon. It just went to show like we have no idea, which is part of the answer to the second part about the philosophy, which is, I think ultimately in any of this work, whether you're doing like these sort of, we are like lovingly, we spend, months on them, that sort of thing, or you're doing short stuff. It's at a certain level, you're partly doing it for yourself, and it's okay to admit that you're doing it for yourself, and that's partly why we focus on a certain type of work, is like, that's the work that we care about and that we want to do. And I don't want to say we don't care if people read it, because we definitely try to get as many people to read it as possible, but I think our ultimate goal is, number one, to feel good about what we produce, and number two, to try to compensate the writers for the work that they're doing. And part of that is finding an audience that allows us to compensate them properly. But the third one, this is actually, I'm going to steal this because my friend Doug McGray, who's actually the founder of California Sunday Magazine, I had him on the podcast, and he said something that like really resonated with me, which is that people's lives are kind of made up of their memories. And if you can like lodge something in someone's memory, even a little bit, that's a very significant thing. And I think that's part of what we're doing, is we're trying to take one of these stories and lodge it in someone's memory. And even if it's even if 200,000 people click on the story and, 50,000 of them read it in a significant way, and 1,000 of them kind of remember it a month later, like, to me, that's a big success. Now, if you work at one of these like high production websites, that's a failure, maybe, because you wanted to get 1 million people to read that story and you wanted it to go crazy on Facebook. But I think ultimately, like, from our perspective, like, we'd like to have a little bit of a different goal, which doesn't mean we don't care about the commercial aspects and we don't care about the number of readers. It just means like we're trying to put something else first, maybe.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Well, now I'm really glad that I stood up, because my question relates to a class that I'm currently in, where our idea is to write up our memories in narrative long form and then try to get as many people as possible to read them. And so we've been talking a lot about, okay, how do we do this? And so my question is, you have this beautiful website, and then you also have a platform where people can kind of package and share their stories however they like. So in terms of the website, do you find that a lot of the stories are actually being shared and moved around on social media? Do people discover them on the website, or is the website sort of just a hosting platform and the stories are moving around only through media? Like, how do people access?
Yeah, it's more the latter. I mean, people are finding out about them largely through other places. It's not like we get a tremendous amount of traffic to our homepage that then people, because we're monthly, like, it's just, there's no way that we can get people to just like click on the website every day hoping that it's the day that we don't even publish on a regular schedule.
Set
actually,
an alarm on the calendar.
Yeah, that would be incredible if they did. But yeah, I think the sort of, but that's true of so many websites now. Like, the idea of building a website and then getting like consistent traffic to it, like, the New York Times can do that and the BuzzFeed can do that. But if you're something smaller and you're something independent, that's going to be very difficult to do. So the idea is to have those stories spread through social media, to have people talk about them, and then they do, in most cases, end up coming back to the website and reading them. Although that may change as well, like, Facebook Instant or other ways for stories to be sort of ingested into other platforms. It's like a longer conversation and a controversial one, maybe, but ultimately, like, we want something well designed to be read by people somewhere. And right now, they mostly read it at our website. If that happens somewhere else, like, that would probably be cool with us too. But you're right that getting people to just show up looking for something is like, that idea seems very passé to me. So, but in some ways it's good because it means a smaller entity can, or an individual even, like, you can spread a story through your networks of people in a way that was not possible before. And if you couldn't get a story published by some magazine that already had a huge audience, like, you're pretty much out of luck. And again, that has an impact on, like, the quality of stuff that's out there, because there's a huge range of quality of stuff out there. But if you take an optimistic view, the good stuff ends up finding its way to readers.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, sure.
So do you think that that has an effect on whether or not a website needs to have sort of like a cohesive vision or feel or even brand, we could say, in terms of, like, we kind of all know what the New Yorker is. If we're just having pieces that are coming through all these avenues of social media, and they may lead us back to a website where there's somewhat of a similar feel story to story, does it matter that you have, like, a vision for a publication?
That is a really good question that I don't think that there's an answer to right now. Like, that seems to be a concept that's in flux. And I don't know. Like, you could look at it either way. Like, something like the New Yorker, when you see the New Yorker font, if you're a person who loves the New Yorker, like, you trust it in a way. Like, you trust that that's going to be a good story. You trust that it's well produced, that the facts are right. And if you see a story in your Facebook feed that's just a random story, you might not know that. Now, the question is, like, ultimately, is that distinction going to maintain over time? Like, is it going to matter? And I tend to think yes. I tend to think that given the, like, sea of stuff that we're awash in, like, it kind of matters more that you know the sources that you trust. But that could be a bias by the way I consume things and the way I came up in magazines and the fact that I just love magazines. That may not be broadly true in the way that I hope that it's true, but I think we don't actually know that yet. In fact, something like Facebook Instant, which is, like, just starting, will in some ways, like, reveal that. Like, do people care where stuff comes from? Or do they just want everything in the same font, look exactly the same, and then they'll just, if it sounds good, they'll click on it? I don't know. Obviously, I hope for it to go one direction.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, if you look at this media landscape and all the new stuff that's come along in recent years, one of the, if there was a close competitor to you at Atavist, I would say it was Matter, in a way, in that it was part of a platform, Medium, that was, as many of you probably know, founded by one of the founders of Twitter, kind of out of guilt for what he had brought upon the world with Twitter, and he decided he needed to create another platform that would allow people to say more than 144 characters. And so he had this platform, Medium, that he wanted people to use and that they weren't really using. So he decided to create kind of a showcase publication that they called Mattered, invest money in good journalism, long-form journalism, hired good editors, paid writers well, and then recently in the last year, more or less pulled the plug on that and sort of scaled it back and sort of said, well, okay, maybe we're not going to do that as much. Did you look at that and say, we lasted longer than the guy who founded Twitter? Or did you look at that and think, maybe this, has a shelf life or it has some limits to how far it can go? Or did you just not care?
I wouldn't say I didn't care. I would say it might be neither of those. I mean, first, I'm not, if they've pulled the plug on it, I'm not aware of that in terms of, I mean, I know that they've changed the way that they approach things. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, that may have meant, like, I mean, I know people who were doing certain things there and getting paid for it who are not anymore, but I don't know if other people are getting paid for things that weren't getting paid for it anymore. So I just don't know what the internal situation is there. But when it comes to like Matter specifically, I mean, I look at it all the time, and I think they still do great work. Like I see their great work, and I'd love to. I wouldn't love to, but like it would benefit me to like disparage it. But they won a National Magazine Award this year, and I thought like quite deservedly so. And so to me, I guess I don't really look at it as like a zero-sum thing. Like I want Matter to succeed because I want people to be paying for this type of work, and whether that's because it's on top of a platform, great, and it helps that platform gain more users through showcasing it. Like that's what we do in many ways. So like I'm a fan of that, and I certainly hope that they would keep doing that. But in terms of like what it says, what they do, what it says about us, I feel like we do our own thing and they do their own thing, and I mean, there's so many. It's like Grantland went away, and you say like, okay, well, what does that mean? And you know, maybe it means something for us. Maybe it means that like there's not an audience big enough for this type of work, but it actually doesn't impact what we do at all. It may have meant that like there's some weird management thing happening at ESPN where they had a disagreement and they had this perfectly lovely business that they didn't execute right, and now that he's going to go start it somewhere else. So, yeah, I mean, obviously I try to keep up on everything that's going on, but I try also to be a fan of everything else rather than like really like fear it in some way.
My question goes to both writing and editing. You know, you started really as a writer, and now you edit a lot of stuff. How has putting on the editor's hat changed your writing, both for better or not so much for better? And who edits you now?
Yeah,
other than yourself.
I'm writing something right now. I haven't written anything in a couple of years, actually, like a story. Like I've written some small things, but like a longer story, like for us. And I'm doing it now. And it is interesting. I think hopefully I've become less precious about my writing. I don't think I was like a prima donna before, but I definitely, like I think there's a balance when you're writing and you have time to work with an editor, between really caring about your work. Like you want it to be good. You want it to reflect your vision of the reporting you did and the story you want to produce. But also the editor has goals, and you're sort of competing sometimes against their goals might be slightly different in terms of the publication and what they want. And you don't want to be the kind of person who's like yelling and screaming into the phone over a sentence that got changed. And I don't think that I was ever that person, but I think I've become even more just like, I want to be in the hands of a good editor, and I want that editor to like help me, and recognizing that editor is helping me, not standing in my way. Like, it's not like I have a vision for an incredible story and I'm being thwarted by an editor. Like, anytime you're in a relationship with an editor who's spending enough time on a 10,000-word story to like sit down and tell you section 2 should be section 1, like they're trying to help you. They're not trying to mess your thing up. So I think I like to think I always knew that, but I think that's at the forefront of my mind now because I've been an editor, and before I hadn't been. And as to who edits me, Katya Bachko, who's our executive editor, edits me. She actually edits all of our stories now. I just kind of like come in later and read them and say like, wait, what about this tiny thing? Like she does all. If you read a great story in the Atavist magazine, it was edited by Katya Bachko, not by me.
So if you were to look at one of your pieces from, I don't know, 7 years ago or something, and look at it now, how would it be different in the writing? What have you done? How have you changed as a writer, do you think, because of being an editor?
I think the main way I've changed I don't know. I think someone else have to read my stuff to say that. I think now, I feel like now I care much more about simple sentences, like taking a much more direct approach. Like I used to use like 1,000 em dashes. Like you could go through and find like 3 em dashes in every paragraph, and I still suffer from that a little bit. Like I like to use like parentheticals and like I'm talking about this, but now I'm going to stop for a second and talk about this, and then I'm going to go back to that. And now I try much harder to just be more direct in how the story is told, partly because if you get a rough draft from someone who's done a bunch of that, it can just be a huge mess. And I feel like I probably delivered some huge messes in the service of, I'm going to write these more elaborate sentences. And now I think I just want to tell the story, and I want to tell it in the most direct way. Try to be descriptive, but tell it in the most direct way that I can.
Great. Well, unless there are any other questions, anybody else? Evan, I want to thank you for taking the time. It's been really fascinating and helpful.
Yeah,
so
thanks.
Thanks for being here. Thank you all for coming.